Welcome to step number 2 of the yarn wrap style. In this step, I will be teaching you step by step how to install yarn wraps on your very own hair. So now that you have your hair supplies ready, I will first show you how to prepare your yarn by using your yarn, scissors, and measuring tape. And then after that, we will go into detail on installing our yarn wraps. So now that you have your supplies ready, we're going to begin measuring out our yarn for our yarn wraps. Before I show you how to measure out your yarn, I first want to talk about the type of yarn you have to use. The yarn that I have here in my hands is called 100% acrylic yarn, and this is in the color black. You of course can get shades of brown if you want to match more of your hair color if you don't have a black hair color, but black matches more to my hair color. And the reason why it's very important that you use 100% acrylic yarn is because any other yarn like cotton yarn and wool yarn will lock on your hair. I highly discourage using cotton or wool yarn because it locks, and that makes it extremely difficult to take down off of your hair. There have even been some stories of women who've had to cut out the yarn from their hair because they just cannot detangle it or take it down. So when using acrylic yarn, it will not stick on your hair, will not mat to your hair or lock. You can take it down with ease. So now I'm going to talk about the ways that you can take down your yarn when you're preparing your yarn wraps. So you have a piece of string that hangs around the yarn here, and you can unravel it this way, as you see, where it unwinds around the entire spool. Or you can unravel it from the end here, where it just comes straight out like this. And that's the way I'm going to measure mine out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the yarn from here, and I'm going to pull out a large length or a long length to begin measuring. So now the piece that I have here is pretty long, and now I'm going to measure out the length that I want. I want my locks to be about 20 inches long, at least to go at my shoulders or past my shoulders. So I'm going to actually measure to 40 inches. The reason why is because when you're braiding, you fold the yarn in half. So when you fold in half, that's the actual length you're going to have for your braid. But to measure out the length, you have to double that of what you want. So if I want my yarn wraps to be 20 inches, I have to measure out 40 inches in length. So now I'm just going to grab my measuring tape, and I'm going to place my yarn up top, and I'm going to measure out 40 inches. Now before you cut at 40 inches, you want to add a few more inches just to give you room for a little bit of error, because some braids may be a little bit shorter when you cut more yarn off, so it depends. So just to be safe that all of them will at least be 20 inches, I'm just going to measure out about 3 more inches of yarn, and I'm going to hold that piece there and tie a knot around the yarn. So now where my pincher finger and my thumb is, it's where the 40-inch mark is. And what I'm going to do is grab the end of the other piece of my yarn, hold it there, and simply tie a knot. This is just going to form for me a full circle, as you see here, of how long it will be. So if you can imagine braiding, you have to locate the middle area of the yarn, and then you begin braiding. So this measurement should be about 20 inches. So now what I'm going to do to prepare multiple pieces of yarn is simply continue to rotate this circle I've formed here all the way around my hands. So I'm just going to stretch the yarn around the full circle like that, and just keep going. Grab my other hand and then stretch my other hand around. You're just going to keep pulling very tightly to make sure you have the form of the yarn you want, and then you're just going to continue to go around in a circle constantly. And then when you have a huge amount, you're going to cut this amount in half to serve for your pieces of yarn. Make sure that as you're doing this, you're fully stretching out your yarn, as you see here, so that way you don't have pieces that are too long or too short than what you actually want. So for now, I'm just going to stop here. For example, I'm going to grab a section. You can cut anywhere you want on your piece. I'm going to grab my scissors, I'm going to stretch that yarn over the blade and then make my cut. So now as you see here, these are my pieces of yarn, and these are the pieces you're going to be using to braid. So gather a couple of more bunches of these pieces of yarn here, and then I will show you how to actually begin doing your yarn braids for your yarn wraps. So now I'm going to be teaching you step by step how to do your yarn wraps. As you can see, all of my hair is pretty much complete. I've braided all of my yarn braids and I've wrapped yarn around each individual yarn braid, as you can see here. We're almost finished, but I have 2 more to do, and that's where I'm going to show you how to do it in detail. I have some hair that I've already pre-sectioned, so I'm going to be teaching you slowly in step-by-step detail on this here, and then for the second one I'm going to go at a more normal speed. As I teach you how to do this one in detail, you of course are going to do the same thing for all of your yarn wraps. So now to begin, what I'm going to do is grab my sections of yarn. Depending on the size of your yarn wrap, you're going to need more yarn per braid or less. But for my size, 5 pieces of yarn is perfect. So now I'm just going to grab 5 pieces. And then I'm going to position it in my fingers just like regular braiding hair. So you're going to take 2 yarn pieces away from 3. You're going to wrap the 2 pieces around the 3 pieces of yarn. And this serves as 3 individual legs of your braid. So for the piece that has 2 yarn pieces, you're going to use your index, middle finger, and thumb to hold that section there. Then with your other hand, you're going to insert your index finger through and wrap the rest of your fingers around the yarn. So this is how your hands should look so far. Now take this hand that has the thumb, index, and middle finger and go underneath to insert your index finger through and pinch the yarn in between your thumb and your index. So once again, I'm going to show you how that's done. So with all 5 pieces together, you take 2, wrap the 2 yarn pieces around the 3 yarn pieces to form 3 legs. With your dominant hand, you're going to use these 3 fingers to pinch the hair that has 2 pieces of thread. Now with your other hand, insert your index and just close your fingers around the hair. Now take these fingers here, turn it underneath, insert your index through, and pinch the yarn in between your thumb. That's how you always start with my technique of braiding, and that's exactly how I'm going to teach you as well with the yarn braids. So now you're going to go up to your scalp, and then you're going to gather all of your hair here with your other hand, making sure you get close to the roots so you have all of your hair gathered. Open up your index and your thumb and grab all of your hair like that. So once again, you just open up your index and your thumb and you grab all of your hair. And then you begin braiding. So you're just going to continue braiding until you pass your real hair. When doing your yarn wraps, you do not have to braid your yarn braids down to the very ends. You only have to braid past your real hair. So now that I've braided about 1 inch to 2 inches past my real hair, I can now begin wrapping my yarn braids. So now I'm just going to drop my braid down just like that. And now I'm going to grab some yarn to begin wrapping. Now you don't have to use much yarn to wrap around your yarn braids, but for this size, using 2 strands of yarn is perfect. So now I'm just going to grab 2 pieces. I'm going to make sure they're pretty even here at the beginning so that when I'm wrapping, I can clearly go past the little ends that hangs there. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So now this is where you want to pinch the hair so that way you have a good handle on where you want to start and how long you have to wrap before you pass the end pieces. So now at this point I'm going to go up. I'm going to place it firmly against my braid. I'm using my other hand and I'm using my thumb underneath the braid to guide me. So I'm just going to place it there right at the beginning of the braid. And I'm going to use my pincher and thumb to hold the hair. You're going to take both ends and literally wrap it around your braid. As you're wrapping, you want to make sure that you're keeping the thread very flatly against the braid So when you wrap it around, make sure it goes flat against the braid. And as you're bringing it back around, continue to keep it flat. You don't want the yarn to twist on itself as you're wrapping because it won't look as consistent. So make sure every time it's winding around the braid, it's very flat. So you're just going to continue to rotate it around. Just like so. So now I'm nearing where I'm almost going to pass the very end of my yarn that I've placed on my braid. So as you can see here, these are the two pieces that were the ends when I started. And you want to make sure that it's a very short amount. You don't need to directly grab the yarn in the middle. You just want to start off by making sure you have enough yarn to wrap as much as you possibly can. So that's why I made this little piece here very short so I can go past that. So in order to go past that and conceal it, you just keep wrapping around very tightly, making sure that your yarn is flat. And now when my yarn runs out, I'm gonna come back and show you how to use your next set of pieces to continue on as you wrap all the way down your yarn wrap. So now as you can see, this is about how far my two yarn pieces have gotten me. When I started wrapping the very top of my yarn braid, I continued to wind all the way around, keeping the yarn very flat until I ran out. And as you can see here, these are the two pieces that stick out. So in order to continue, what you have to do is grab two more pieces of yarn, lay this piece down very flatly in a downward direction, as you see here. So I lay the two pieces downward, and then I take my next two pieces, I lay these pieces downward as well. Then I'm gonna overlap some of the yarn I had already wrapped, and that's perfectly fine. It's gonna blend just perfect. So begin wrapping it the same way you have done. The piece that you originally ran out, the two pieces that hang down, you gotta lay those down flat. And then when you start wrapping your new yarn, you have to lay those two pieces down flat as well. And then just continue wrapping. So now as you can see, as I'm nearing the bottom here, there's a couple of short pieces, two there, and there's two more hidden in this yarn somewhere else. And all you have to do is continue to wrap your yarn around until you pass all of the pieces. And you just want to make sure to be very conscious that as you are passing the short pieces, that they're laying down very flatly, so that way your yarn can go over it without it sticking out. And if it does stick out, there's no worries. You can just use your scissors to trim those little stubby pieces. You just want to keep wrapping until you're near the very, very ends. So now that you can see I'm approaching the ends and I'm running out of my yarn that I've added in my fingers here, this is the perfect time to seal off your yarn wrap. So from those two pieces of yarn that you have been wrapping the entire time, naturally there's going to be one that's a little bit longer than the other. Take the longer piece. Leave that out to the side. Take the shorter piece and lay it flatly down. Now take the longer piece, wrap it around your wrap, and tie a knot. Very tightly. Make sure to pull very, very tightly. And then do it once more. Wrap it around the lock. Pull it through and create your second knot. And pull it very, very tightly. Now at this point, you can begin trimming off your yarn. Most people like to use a candle lighter or a cigarette lighter to burn the ends, but I highly discourage it because I don't want you to have any accidents or any problems when dealing with hot flames. That's why I never use lighters to seal the ends of any of my braids or twists. Only using scissors to trim off or a braid sealer. A braid sealer does not work best with yarn, so it's better just to use scissors to cut off the ends. So now I'm just going to grab my scissors and I'm just going to cut off the pieces of yarn. Now you can cut it off any way you want. You can cut it off all at once, or you can cut off each individual piece at a time. And I highly suggest that you cut off each individual piece, so that way you don't make the accident of cutting off your knot. If you cut off your knot, you just have to retie your knot a little bit higher. You won't unravel your whole yarn lock if you accidentally cut your knot. All you have to do is retie both knots a little bit higher on your lock. It's perfectly fine. So when you're cutting, just make sure to focus on cutting one individual piece of yarn at a time. Getting as close as possible. Clean up any pieces that kind of stick out a little bit awkwardly. Make sure not to trim your knot. Be very careful. So as you can see, this is a complete yarn lock. It was very easy, very simple, and the technique creates a very flawless looking lock. So now for my very last yarn wrap, I'm going to teach you more at a little bit of a faster pace. I'm going to still talk in detail on tips on how to make sure that you're braiding your yarn braids and wrapping your yarn correctly. So we're going to go through one more time, and I'm going to just prepare the yarn in my hands. So now you want to make sure to use your other hand to gather all of your hair. Open up your index and your thumb of your hair, of your fingers that have your yarn like that. Grab the hair. And then you want to begin braiding. If you want more step-by-step details on everything there is to know about doing yarn braids, make sure to visit Howtoblackhair.com for the Yarn Braiding DVD. So of course, continue braiding until you braid about an inch or two past your real hair. It's not necessary to braid all the way to the ends. So now we're going to begin wrapping. So of course you only need about 2 pieces of yarn. Making sure the ends are pretty even. Use your thumb of your less dominant hand to lie right underneath the braid. Place your yarn directly at the beginning of your braid as close as possible. Use your fingers to make sure those 2 pieces lay down flat against the braid, and begin wrapping. Every time you wrap, concentrate on making sure that the yarn is very flat all the way around the braid. So once again, I'm just going to lay that flat and begin wrapping. In this step of the yarn wraps hairstyle, I've taught you how to do the technique of yarn wrapping step by step. So first, just to overview this step, I've talked about the importance of the type of yarn you have to use that's best for your hair. I've also talked about how to use a measuring tape to determine the overall length that you want with your yarn wraps, as well as how many pieces of yarn you're going to need for braiding your yarn braids, even the pieces of yarn you're going to need for wrapping. I've taught you the techniques for doing the style and so much more. So now that you know how to do yarn wraps, continue until all of your hair is finished. And then in the very next step, step number 3, I will be teaching you some hair care tips and maintenance suggestions for your very new hairstyle.